Welcome to Mitchell Maths. In this video we're going to have a look at fractions and decimals, and mainly converting and how to order them as well. Right, so the first question we're going to look at how we can convert these fractions to decimals. Now, to convert a fraction to a decimal, what you need to be able to do is you need to either write the fraction as being over 10, over 100, or over 1,000. So let's say we, for example, had 7 over 10. Because it's divided by 10, we'd write that as 0.7, just in the tenths column. If it was over 100, so let's say we had, for instance, 17 over 100, we'd write it as 0.17, as in hundredths. So yeah, 0.17. And if we had it over 1,000, you might guess we'd write it to 3 decimal places, so it'd be 0.234, right down to the thousandths column. So the first thing we need to do is we need to see if we can convert the denominator to be either over 10, 100 and 1,000. And there might be some fractions you know generally. Let's have a look at 3/5 first. We can convert 5 into 10 by multiplying by 2. So let's multiply the top and bottom of that fraction by 2. And that will give us 6/10. And when we have it in the tenths column, we can convert it to 0.6. If we have a look at the next one, so that's 17 over 20. With this fraction, we can convert 20 to 100 by multiplying by 5. So if I multiply by 5, I'll get 20 times 5 is 100. And 17 times 5 is 85. And 85 is 100. If we have a look at this again, that's how you write it. So it will be 0.85. Now for the next one, with 200, we could actually convert it to 100. The problem is if we divide 109 by 2, we'd get a fraction. But we can also make 200 into 1,000 by multiplying by 5. So we'll multiply it by 5. That'll get us, so it'll be over 1,000. And 109 times 5 is 545. And we can sort of see from this question again what happens if you have 545 over 1,000. That'll be 0.545. So that's looking at how we convert fractions to decimals, convert it to either the denominator either to 10, 100 or 1,000. Or there might be some you just know off by heart. And you can always do division if you needed to. Right, for these ones, we're going to convert these decimals to fractions and we're going to simplify where possible. So if we remember back to what we did in the last question, if it was, let's say, just 0.7, you can write it as 7 over 10. If it goes to the hundredths column, so if it's 0.38, you could write it as 38 over 100. Of course, we could simplify that. And if we had, let's say, 0.117, that would be 117 over 1,000. So it's going to be so if it's to 1 decimal place, you can write it as over 10. If it's to 2 decimal places, we can write it as over 100. And if it's to 3 decimal places, we can write it as a fraction over 1,000. So let's look at the first one. That's 0.82. That means it's going to be a fraction over 100 because it's to 2 decimal places. So we've got 82 over 100. However, we can divide the top and bottom by 2, which will give us an answer of 41 over 50. If we look at the next one, that's again to 2 decimal places. Even though it's got only one number, it's still to 2 decimal places, so we still need to write it as a fraction over 100, which will be 5 over 100. And we can divide the top and the bottom by 5. 5 divided by 5 is 1. 100 divided by 5 is 20. So it's 1 over 20. And if we have a look at part C, that's to 3 decimal places. Therefore, it's going to be a fraction over 1,000. 502 over 1,000. They're both even, so we can divide them both by 2. Therefore, we're going to get 251 over 500. So that's how to convert decimals to fractions. Depending on the number of decimal places, depends whether you do it as a fraction over 10, over 100, or over 1,000. Sometimes what they'll do is they'll give you a mixture of fractions, decimals, and percentages, and they'll ask you to order them. So we're going to have a look at ordering decimals and fractions when you're given a mixture. The important thing here is to write them as all in the same form. And for this one, I'd write them as decimals. It'll be a lot easier because the fractions can be over different amounts. So it's much easier to convert everything to decimals in this instance. 13 over 20, well, we can times the top and bottom by 5. If we do that, we'd get a fraction over 100, so it would be 13 times 5 would be 65 over 100, which can be written as 0.65. And I'm just going to put it in brackets there, because when I write it in order, I'm still going to need to write it as 13 over 20. The next one's quite easy. It's times by 2, because 50 times by 2 is 100. So we can write that and 61. So because it's over 100, we're going to write it to 2 decimal places, 0.61. And now that I've got them as decimals, I can order them. So 0.599 is the smallest. I'll write that first. So 0.599. My next one will be 0.61. Which will be 31 over 50. My next highest is 0.64. And my largest is 13 over 20. So that's the decimals and fractions in order from smallest to largest. So convert the fractions into decimals. And for the final question, we're just looking at what if it asks you to find a fraction of a decimal? Well, to find a fraction of something, you need to divide by the bottom of it to find what an eighth is. So an eighth of 0.48 would be 0.48 divided by 8, because we're going to split it into 8 parts if we want an eighth of it. And that will give us 0.06. And because we've got 3/8, we want to find 3/8 of it, we're going to times 0.06 by 3. And if we times it by 3, we get 0.18. And that's the answer. So 3/8 of 0.48 is 0.18. Thank you for watching. I hope you found that helpful. If you liked the video and like to see more, please hit the subscribe button. And for practice questions, please visit www.mitchellmathsandscience.com. The link is in the description.